Hey everyone, what's up? Welcome back to Step Forward, the channel for personal development through great books. Today, I'm going to share a really useful book that will help you become a genius. Don't be surprised by this, and I promise this video isn't just hype. The book I'm talking about today will genuinely give you the answers, the belief, and the methods to go from being an ordinary person to someone outstanding, someone excellent in a particular field, or even a true master of a certain skill. And that book is Peak: Secrets from the New Science of Expertise by two authors, Anders Ericsson, a Swedish psychologist and professor at Florida State University, and the science writer Robert Poole. All right, let's dive into the content of this book. You're not as far from being a genius as you think. When we talk about geniuses, the first person who probably comes to mind is the musical prodigy Mozart. At just 7 years old, Mozart held a major concert that stunned the entire music world. But even more astonishing, at the age of 4, Mozart could identify the pitch of any sound. This ability, known as perfect pitch, is still considered extremely rare today, with an estimated 1 in 10,000 people having it. Mozart's ability has always been a prime example when we talk about innate talent, and people often think that geniuses are born with a superior ability that ordinary people can never achieve. But is that really the case? Through his research, Dr. Ericsson discovered the path Mozart took to become a genius. The reason Mozart achieved such high heights was not because he was born a genius, but because he had a father who was an incredibly talented composer. On top of that, Mozart's father was deeply committed to his children's education. First, he tutored Mozart's older sister. Although she wasn't as successful, she still became a musician. After gaining more experience, he then mentored his second child, Mozart himself. In the end, this made Mozart incredibly successful and famous. Therefore, Mozart's innate talent was actually the result of training, education, and practice from a very young age. All geniuses on the surface seem to have abilities that are beyond the reach of ordinary people. But in reality, they all share one single secret to becoming exceptionally skilled: deliberate practice. And what's the difference between them and ordinary people? They always practice using a systematic method that continuously pushes them out of their comfort zone and expands their circle of competence. While the author doesn't deny the role of genetics, his research really debunks this notion and shows us that we're not that far from being geniuses. As long as you know how to practice deliberately, you absolutely have the chance to become different and exceptional. So the first thing is to believe that with the right practice method, we can definitely become more skilled, excellent, and outstanding. The 4 conditions of deliberate practice. Have you ever noticed this? When we learn a new skill, we usually follow these basic steps. First, we get a general idea of what we're going to do. Then we start learning from a teacher, a school, a coach, a book, or a website. After that, we start practicing until we reach an acceptable level and can perform the skill automatically in real life. But here's a very important thing you need to understand. Once your skill level reaches an acceptable and automated stage, it becomes very difficult to improve further. We often make this mistake. We think that if we just keep practicing our existing skills regularly, we'll definitely get better. Even if the progress is slow, we're still on an upward trend. For example, we often assume that a doctor with 10 years of experience is better than one with 5 years, or a teacher with 20 years in the field is better than one who has taught for 5 years. But in reality, that's not the case. The research in this book shows that once someone's skill level reaches an acceptable and automated stage, practicing for a few more years doesn't significantly improve your skills. In fact, some doctors and teachers with 10 to 15 years of experience might not be as good as those who have only been working for 5 or 7 years. Because if we don't intentionally try to improve, the automated skills you practiced before will slowly and gradually degrade.
Therefore, to become truly excellent, we must practice deliberately, meaning we have a conscious desire to break out of this automated level and practice with a purpose. So, what is purposeful practice? Here, we need to grasp the 4 key characteristics of purposeful practice. First, have specific and well-defined goals. Just like in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I talked about in a previous video. Whatever you do, you need to begin with the end in mind. And our purposeful practice needs to be the same. First, you need a big goal, a long-term goal, and then practice by accumulating small wins, taking small steps first to go the long distance. In other words, break down your goals. Second, you need to be focused. As I've mentioned in many previous videos, like the one on Steve Jobs' life secrets, the first is to live simply, and the second is to focus. Focus is the key element of mindfulness, a life experience that makes you happier and more in control. And absolute focus is also the way to achieve flow, the state that makes you more successful and live better. And again, in this book, the author emphasizes that to succeed, you must be completely focused on one single thing at a time. Third, you must have feedback. No matter what you're doing, if you just keep your head down and work without stopping to reflect and get feedback on what you're lacking or what you're not doing well, you'll never figure out what you need to improve, and you won't know how far you are from the finish line. The best way to train a skill is to find a teacher or a coach. And finally, an equally important characteristic is to push past your comfort zone. This is truly the most fundamental truth for any kind of practice. If you're not disciplined enough to force yourself out of your comfort zone, you'll never improve. Stepping out of your comfort zone means trying to do something you've never done before, and these things will initially make you feel uncomfortable, even scared. But once you overcome this hurdle, you'll hold the key to purposeful practice. Believe in yourself, because the brain's adaptability is limitless. Ordinary people, when they practice, might hit a plateau, feeling like they're not improving anymore. But for geniuses, it's not like that. You need to know that most of what we call a plateau is just a psychological barrier you've imagined. In reality, you haven't reached your limit yet. You just don't have enough motivation to push through. Scientific research has found that the brain's ability to adapt far exceeds what an ordinary person perceives. The scientific community used to think that the adult brain was more or less fixed, but studies on taxi drivers and the visual cortex of blind people have overturned this perception. In fact, our brains have an infinite capacity to adapt. That's why world records are constantly being broken. Besides the brain, our bodies also have a strong ability to adapt, but the body tends to prefer stability. And when you force it out of its comfort zone, the body's systems will feel stressed because their initial balance is threatened. But once the body starts to adapt to the new changes, this balance will gradually be reestablished. In short, you need to know that the brain's adaptability is limitless. Therefore, we need to find enough belief and motivation to practice deliberately, with each step out of the comfort zone being a challenge to conquer ourselves. In reality, the difference between you and a genius is your mental representation. The gap between an ordinary person and a master is the gap in their mental representations. In this book, you'll see the term mental representation, and the author places special emphasis on it, stating that the main purpose of deliberate practice is to create effective mental representations. This means that excellent people, masters and experts, are successful because they have better mental representations than ordinary people. And importantly, they constantly practice and optimize these mental representations. So, what is a mental representation? I found that this book doesn't explain the concept very clearly. It vaguely says it's a mental structure. This made me very curious, so I did some digging, and finally I found its origin in the field of cognitive psychology. This is a field that emerged in the 1950s, with a branch that specifically studies how humans learn and remember.
A book, an article, or a video from Step Forward that you're listening to are all incoming information. Before we learn it, it's called an external representation.
When it's processed and stored by our brain, it becomes our internal representation. And this is a mental representation. In other words, all the knowledge structures stored in your brain are your mental representations. How many mental representations you have and their quality will determine your level of understanding. Bill Gates once said, "The biggest difference between people is the difference from the neck up." And that difference from the neck up is the mental representation in each person. You could say that our whole lives we are searching for and perfecting our mental representations to make ourselves wiser. When new knowledge enters our brain, it forms a mental representation. Ultimately, this mental representation will, in turn, determine how we understand this knowledge. In other words, these mental representations determine our level of cognition. Here, I'd like to quote a wise saying from Steve Jobs. Stay hungry. Always maintain a state of thirst for knowledge. Don't think you're already very smart. Don't limit yourself with your existing knowledge or experience. We must constantly train our mental representations. This is what will help you become more skilled, outstanding, and superior. So, how do we apply deliberate practice in our lives? Here, the author has studied many successful cases of exceptional individuals and found that their path to excellence usually goes through 4 stages. You can apply these 4 stages to your own life. The first stage is to spark interest. The second stage, get serious. The third stage is to go all in. And the final stage is to innovate and create. So, that's the most condensed summary of this book. I hope today's sharing has at least somewhat sparked the belief in you and provided you with a method to be ready to become a great person, an expert in a field, or a master of a skill of your own. And don't forget to find and read this book to understand it more deeply. Finally, I'd like to end today's sharing with these keywords. First, spark your passion. Find a job, a skill, a competence that you truly love. And then apply the 3F principle from this book. Focus, feedback, and fix it. Finally, always remember to stay hungry. Always train, develop, and cultivate your mental representations. And finally, I wish for all of us to break through the plateaus on our chosen paths. With that, I also wish you a new year where you find the most important thing to practice deliberately to become excellent in your field or to develop new abilities. Choosing right makes the effort meaningful. Thank you for listening. If you found this video helpful, please share it with those who need it. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch the latest videos every week from Step Forward. Thank you sincerely, and I'll see you in the next videos.